Hey, good morning. Good morning. Welcome to Monday Morning Mindset. I'm Erin from Girl Catch Fire. We help women in midlife get unstuck and on purpose. And I'm going to talk a little bit from my heart today because maybe I've told you before that this feed is often me processing how to deal with life in this very complex world that we live in. And in some ways, I think that is my job. And so the title of today's Monday Morning Mindset is How Not to Collapse. And you're thinking, oh, Mike, I don't know if that's really positive for me. Well, we'll see. Maybe hang around. I'll see if it is or not. So like many of you for the last couple of weeks, I've been struggling. Just watching the news, watching things unfold. And but I've been really quiet about it because parts of me are like, don't respond, there's no point. Parts of me are like, oh no, speak up, because that's what citizens in a republic do, is they speak up. But I've been quiet and I've just been kind of waiting and trying to be thoughtfuful, because I think that we need that. I think we need thoughtfulness. And then last week, my sister lost her job, and the 20-year business that she had built. And she is a downstream contractor of USAID funding, which was frozen by executive order last week. And, when stuff that goes on at the federal level affects you personally, that shouldn't be the only reason we get involved, but it just seems to take it up a notch. And that certainly happened for me. And as a coach and as a, mental health practitioner, like, I feel like I go first and I get to work out these things in my own life and then attempt to bring them to my clients. So that's what I've been doing. And, working on the rage that it's easy to feel when people are pulling levers that have all sorts of knock-on effects all over the world. So certainly my sister is a knock-on effect, having basically lost a business she spent 20 years building, but that doesn't even take into account all the people all over the world that rely on USAID funding. And maybe you think it's a good idea. That's not the point of today. And in fact, I've actually disabled the comments because I don't want to spend my day like arguing with people about some of the things that are going on. Like, they are happening. We do now have a foreign-born billionaire in control of the U.S. Treasury payment system. We're now officially in a trade war with Canada and Mexico. So these things are happening. And I don't want to spend my day talking to people about why they think it's a good idea. Don't think it is. So from a nervous system perspective, and again, if you think everything's delightful and wonderful, like, today might not be for you. But if you're struggling like I am, and like feeling pain for people, and today might be your day. So I do want to just a quick thing about nervous system stuff. And I think this is important. Even if you don't know anything about Polyvagal Theory, which we teach around here, you probably do know about the fight or flight state of your nervous system and the freeze state of your nervous system. And that's going to be important in this discussion. Maybe you have been bouncing between fight or flight like me, and freeze, also known as the sympathetic nervous system state and the dorsal vagal state. And maybe, like me, you're like, yeah, but I still have to get up and go to work, or I got to take care of my kids, or there's stuff I got to do. So help. And that's what I feel like my role is in my career, is helping people navigate difficult things in their life, kind of no matter what they are. So even if things are just wonderful for you right now, that's great. And maybe that won't be the case at some point, and you might find this helpful. So anyway, so in this kind of period of quietness, and by the way, like, I've struggled, do I say something? Do I not say something? And right now I feel like I have a lot of peace. So here we go. I hope this helps you. As usual, I always look to the scriptures. And ironically, I happen to be in the portion of the Old Testament in Ezekiel and Isaiah. And I've also just spent a lot of time hearing about empires falling and the nation of Israel being judged and being invaded and being invited to repent and to turn away. And so that is an interesting context to be in right now with all this other stuff that's happening. But it's also super stressful. So I'm also looking to the Lord Jesus. And I know that not all of you believe like I do, and that's fine. You don't have to. But he was described as full of grace and truth in equal measure. Grace being extending forgiveness and compassion and mercy while also upholding moral standards for truthfulness, which one of my favorite stories in the scriptures, in the Gospels, is of Jesus flipping over tables in the temple. Because we always like to think of gentle Jesus with the lamb and all that stuff, and he was. But don't forget, he's also the Jesus that braided a whip and went into the temple because he was furious that the temple, the place of worship, had been turned into a marketplace, and that the poor were being taken advantage of in that environment. And so, yeah, he flipped some tables and cracked a whip, and it created a whole bunch of chaos. And so grace and truth in equal measure. Whatever does that look like right now? And that's where I've been going. And so let's start with the truth side. Again, I hope this helps you. I think right now, with everything that's going on in the world, but particularly what's happening in the United States, like, it's going to be more and more important that we all are really relying on trusted sources of information. And you're like, oh, check, I got that. And okay, sure, maybe. But sometimes those trusted sources are becoming harder and harder to find, because don't forget, what media is now is very, very different than it was 40 years ago, before news was a profit center for national media corporations. Okay. So it's a very different thing than it was even when I was a kid. And in fact, I remember in the 70s and 80s, like my parents sitting down and watching the news, and it was boring, but I had to watch it because it came on before the Cosby Show. And there was a couple guys on the news at that time, like Peter Jennings, Ted Koppel, and Dan Rather. Like, I remember them. I remember my parents watching them. Anyway, when we're talking about people who are delivering information and contextualizing it, Dan Rather is still doing it. The guy's 91 years old. Can you believe that? He was reporting on Kennedy's assassination. He was there during Watergate. He interviewed Nixon. Like, he was a White House chief correspondent for the White House. And anyway, it's just a very different time. And so when we talk about trusted sources of information, like for me, relying on somebody who's been in the business for 50 years-ish might be a pretty good source of information. Anyway, all that to say is he's writing on Substack, and he's got a newsletter called Steady. And what I like about this, is that he's a veteran newsman, but also he is simply saying, this is what happened, and here's the context. And I think when we talk about grace and truth in equal measure, truth is going to be really important. Our sources of truth are going to be really important. Look, I'm even doing this. It's terrible that I'm even doing that. Also, along with him is a woman named Heather Cox Richardson, which some of you may already know. And again, like, they may be writing stuff that you don't like. And okay, but actually that really wasn't the point of news. It never was. The point of news used to be just to tell you what was happening and then contextualize it. And so she's doing the same thing and has been for several years now. She writes she's a history professor at Boston College and a historian. And she writes a Substack that comes out every single day, which is exhausting. But she's writing about what happened the day before and then contextualizing it. Here's what happened, and here's why it matters. So I don't want to read these things. I don't. But to me, I feel like at this time, it's really critical for those of us who are citizens of a republic, which is in the United States. If that's where you're watching it, you are one. To really pay close attention and to understand very complex things that we'd rather just ignore. None of what's going on right now is going to fit into a soundbite. There's really some incredible things happening. So when we talk about truth, all I'm going to say is, like, what are your trusted sources of information? And if the things that I mentioned about the U.S. Treasury and the trade war are like not on your radar, well, Maybe they should be. It's kind of important stuff. So that's the first thing I want to say. But the second thing I want to say about that is like, in order not to collapse into a dorsal vagal state, we're going to have to do this stuff in moderation. If I read these Substacks first thing in the morning, it makes me insane and almost dysfunctional for the rest of the day. So I really have to pick a time when I feel strong enough to be able to handle it. And so moderation is going to be super key. So if all you're doing is consuming media and just getting inundated by it, recognize that you are actually presenting your nervous system with a really significant threat that's either going to push you into fight or flight or push you into shutdown and freeze. And neither of those is really effective for taking your life forward anywhere. The other nervous system state is called a ventral vagal state. That's when you're present and grounded and your prefrontal vortex is online and you're in the moment and you're making clear decisions and clear-headed. Okay? That's probably where we need to be. So if you're bouncing between kind of shutdown and panic, take a look at what's getting you there and say, okay, do I need to adjust this? So moderation. And also, holy smokes, guys, social media is not the place for this. None of what's going on right now fits very well into a soundbite. Maybe it doesn't fit at all into a soundbite. So really think carefully about that. So that's the truth piece. That's the truth side. Remember, grace and truth in equal measure. Let's talk about the grace piece. I got stuff for you today. This is where the strategy, I'm hoping, is really going to help you. So this morning I read constantly, and probably I need to moderate myself because there's a lot and it can be overwhelming. So there's a rabbi that I like, and I'll link all this stuff in the show notes. It's going to take me a few minutes to link these things, but you can find it here. One of the rabbis that I read on Substack, she said, while all this is happening, and a lot of it is unprecedented, whether or not you agree with that, a lot of stuff hasn't happened before. So it's a threat to our nervous system to have so much uncertainty about, oh my goodness, what's going to happen next? She said, don't forget to fortify inside. Isn't that interesting? Fortify inside. And she quoted a Choctaw Nation elder and Episcopal bishop who said this: when things feel like they are happening too fast, the elders suggest slowing down your reactions to them. Leaping forward to respond to every new reality can wear you out. So practice mindfulness. You will know when and how to act when your response will have an impact. Do not lose your sense of balance. Choose your own time and place. I think that is brilliant advice. So fortifying inside, slowing it all down. That's grace strategy number one. Remember, grace and truth in equal measure. Okay, how do I stay on the truth side of things? And how do I live with grace? This is not an easy move. So let me give you some more. Rainer Marie Rilke said this: let this darkness be a bell tower, and you be the bell. As you ring, what batters you becomes your strength. So I think that a lot of people, like, just take my sister as an example. She and all of her colleagues all over the world are figuring it out. She's being battered with this right now, but not to mention the millions of people who rely on those programs are being battered right now. People who have much less resilience and capability of weathering the battering. This is happening. So maybe it's going to happen to you too. Maybe it's going to happen to me. I don't know. But what I'm trying to say is that we have to be prepared, and how we are prepared is critically important. So grace and truth in equal measure. I've got the truth side down. So fortifying inside, thinking about like, okay, yep, this might be battering. So what, now what? How do I want to deal with that? One of the ways I think that we ought to consider dealing with that is something I'm calling hyperlocality, which just simply means being more involved in live people in your environment than ones that you see through a screen. And not that there's anything wrong with people that you see through a screen, but the world can feel distorted through a screen. So if that's the only place that you're interacting with other human beings, your nervous system is like, what the heck is this? right? Also, things can feel really, really escalated and dire, and they do. But when you go outside and walk your dog and bump into your neighbor about how you both had the flu for the last week, like that is actually something your nervous system recognizes and can help you step into the ventral vagal state. This is what I mean about hyperlocality. So that might also look like really making a point to volunteer your time and resources in your community, because not only will people need this as threats to various programs are on the horizon, um, but it's helpful to you and it's helpful to them. Hyperlocality. Where can you be involved? I was inspired by one of our, it's actually several of my clients who've gotten involved with the program called Lasagna Love that started during COVID. And the idea is you just go make lasagna and they network, and they put people together, bakers and people who need a meal. Right. And so a lot of my clients are doing this, and it was inspired by one of them who like got into it a year or so ago and has made 40 or 50 lasagnas in that time. But you're seeing real people and you're seeing them live and you're face to face, and they have a need and you're filling it. They have a need and you're filling it. Okay. So that's a little bit of what I mean. So this kind of step into radical generosity in a very local way, I think is going to be a grace strategy going forward. So I want to ask you, like, where are you doing this? If you are alone on your phone or on your desktop or just reading the papers or whatever and consuming news, you are jacking with your nervous system. Like your nervous system is not designed to handle such a thing. Okay. So how local are you? It's just something to consider. And then also there's a book that I have given to my clients for years. And it's called Holy Moments by Matthew Kelly. And he's a Catholic, practicing Catholic. And his theory was like, in every moment, each one of us has the ability to push the outcome of that moment in a direction, either in a holy or an unholy direction. We have that capability, but we just have to be awake to it. So, how is it that you're walking through the world? Are you seeing every moment as an opportunity to push in a holy direction or an unholy direction, live and in person? And something I would say to this point is that when we are behind our screens all the time, a lot of us have gotten awfully brave behind our screens. And there's a disconnect between who we are live and who we are online. And so if I would just suggest, like, evaluate your behavior online. And if you are not even necessarily writing stuff yourself, but sharing stuff that you would never say to somebody's face, maybe don't share it. Because again, there's an alignment that I think would be helpful if we really cultivate an alignment between our online persona and our live persona. And so many of us, especially after COVID, got really out of the habit of having a live persona at all. We need to get back in that habit. So a lot of alignment. And if I can make a suggestion about that alignment is like, we have to default on the side of generosity and kindness and mercy and grace, even with people who voted us into this situation. And I'm talking to myself right now, as much as I'm talking to anybody. There are people in my neighborhood right now that I have been avoiding, and I'm going to stop doing that. Grace and truth in equal measure. This is hard territory. This is a hard walk. So, but we're in a new season. This is a new deal. All right. One more point that rabbi that I follow, Rabbi Danya, I'm going to link it below. When she's talking about fortifying yourself, she said, don't forget to do the things that nourish you. Make a point to do them. So it's really easy to fall down the rabbit hole of the news or the current events or whatever. It's easy to do that. And again, truth, as a citizen in a republic, we need to do that to some degree, but we don't need to fall down the rabbit hole. Be thoughtful about it, and make sure you're also including things that nourish you, going out and walking, putting your feet in the grass, looking up at the sunshine, painting, reading, drinking tea, talking with a friend, what stuff, all the stuff, again, that your nervous system recognizes and helps you push into a ventral vagal state, out of a state of shutdown or out of a fight or flight state. These are really important. I know I've gone over. Thank you for sticking around. Blessings. May the Lord keep you. Bless you and keep you. I'm going to read you one last thing. It's a poem. It's going to take me a minute to read it, but I think it's important. There's a poet. This also came through my Substack. If you guys aren't following Substack and like what people are saying, by the way, the people who are writing on it, like Heather Cox Richardson and Dan Rather, you can pay them for their efforts, which seems very appropriate. There's a poet named Rosemary Wahtola Trommer, and she has shared a poem a day since 2006 online. Since 2006, that's something. And she has a podcast called The Poetic Path, I believe is what it's called. Anyway, so she wrote this poem. Somebody sent it to me, or it was on Substack. I'm going to read it to you. And if you can close your eyes and listen to it, I think it might be helpful because this is on the grace side. This is on the grace side. Okay, ready? So I can't save the world. I can't even save my soul. I can't wrap my arms around every frightened child. I can't foster peace among the nations. I can't bring love to all who feel unlovable. So I practice opening my heart right here in this room and being gentle with my insufficiency. I practice walking down the street heart first. And if it is insufficient to share love, I will practice loving anyway. I want to converse about truth, about trust. I want to invite compassion into every interaction. One willing heart can't stop a war. One willing heart can't feed all the hungry. And sometimes, daunted by a task too big, I tell myself, what's the use in trying? But today, the invitation is clear. To be ridiculously courageous in love, to open the heart like a lilac in May, knowing freeze is possible and opening anyway. To take love seriously, to give love wildly, to race up to the world as if I were a puppy, adoring and unjaded, stumbling on my own exuberance, to feel the shock of indifference, of anger, of cruelty, of fear, and stay open, to love as if it matters, as if the world depends on it. That's a poem, I think it's called Because, and it's from her book of poetry called The Unfolding, which was published last year. Again, I'm going to link that below. So I know that this is longer than it usually is, but we're in really important times, guys, right now. And two things I know is one is I can't walk around angry and cynical and jaded and bitter, although there are lots of reasons perhaps I feel justified in doing so, and other people as well. I have to find a way to live in grace and truth in equal measure. So I'm going to make sure to fortify myself inside. I'm going to work on hyperlocality. I'm going to slow down and wait until I'm asked to step forward so that the step I take has impact. And I'm going to stay informed in a way that isn't going to sink me. It isn't going to drop me in to a dorsal vagal state and shut me down. This is an extremely tall order. And so if you feel overwhelmed, just so you know, I see you and I get it. The more that we can stick together to stay connected in times like this with one another, the better. And again, if everything is wonderful for you, that is delightful. And maybe someday this training might be helpful. Might not always be the case. I don't know. So as ever, I pray that God blesses you and keeps you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for going 10 minutes over with me today. Thanks for joining me on Monday Morning Mindset.